how do we stay on top of every individual piece of feedback? And I think one of the things that's really holding people back is this mentality that our feedback, we treat it almost like an inbox, and we want to get to inbox 0. And what you both just said proves that that's impossible.
Hello everybody, and welcome to the Product Ops Chronicles with myself, Graham Reed, and my co-host and ever lovely Product Ops pal, Antonia Landi. Hello Antonia, welcome back.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Today we are joined by Aly Mahan, Product Operations Manager at Pendo. Really excited to have you on the show today, Aly.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Would you like to take a moment just to introduce yourself and tell us about your background in Product Ops?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been at Pendo for about 6 years now. In 2019, I was working for a startup here in Sheffield called Receptive. It was all about customer feedback, and we were acquired by Pendo in 2019. So I joined the team as a Scrum Master. In about 2022, our Agile Practices team actually became Program Management. So I moved over to that team. And then about a year ago, I officially joined the Product Operations team as lead Product Operations Manager. So that's where I'm at now. I've been in Sheffield and in the UK for about 10 years now. So apologies for whatever's happening with my accent at different times throughout this recording. I confuse a lot of people with that. But I'm originally from Washington State. So
fabulous. Thank you. Awesome. Well, today we have got actually kind of two rough topics to talk about. Firstly, we're going to kick off today by talking about discovery, feedback, and decision making, and how does Product Ops facilitate all of this and all of the things in between. And then with having Aly on the show, coming from Pendo, who I'm sure so many of us in the audience have at least heard of, if not been a customer at some point. I'm going to take advantage of this point and just find out a little bit more about what does Product Ops look like within the towers at Pendo. So real treat for everybody today. But let's dive in first. Aly, what's on your mind when it comes to decision making and feedback and everything in this topic?
yeah, so I think this is a fascinating topic. It's kind of funny because I did for 10 years ago, I was talking to customers. I was in customer success. I was talking to our customers who were product managers, and they were like, how do we manage our feedback at scale? So I was talking about this for year after year after year. And then now I find myself back in the product operations world talking about feedback again. And it's just so funny because I think we've come a long way in how we talk about it, but I still think we're limited by some of the same mentalities that we had 10 years ago. So I just want to kind of talk about that today. I'm really curious to get your insights as well and your perspective. One of the first things I think to kind of open us up is, do you find that there's a lot of pressure on product teams and product operations in particular to have it all together when it comes to feedback and have everything be this perfect machine so that product managers can have the data they need, at every point in time? Are you seeing that in the industry? Does it feel like there's a lot of pressure out there? I know every time I go on LinkedIn, it's like, here's this 30-step list of things you need to do with your feedback. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so I think the pressure is definitely there. I think like we spoke a few weeks ago as well, and I told you that my focus has increasingly become how to marry product and data, and qualitative data and customer feedback, and how to synthesize that is definitely a part of that. That pressure is definitely there. Honestly, reflecting, and this is even like going beyond me as an acting product ops manager and leader, I've very rarely, almost never seen a company who had it all together. Like there were always, because you get customer feedback from so many different channels, right? You get it through your customer success team. You get it through app store reviews. You get it through feedback forms, right? Maybe your PMs going out there proactively soliciting feedback and codifying all of that, putting it into a format that makes it somewhat comparable and somewhat findable across the organization, I think is a really, really tough nut to crack, honestly.
Yep.
Yeah, you said it all, Antonia. I think it's such a varied part of the role within the whole business. Realistically, if you extend the scope out a little bit further to not just kind of hearing customer feedback, but actually to then kind of what the market trends are, competitor analysis, basically your entire research that is the foundation of why you do what you do, or see if we scope it a little bit, why you're building what you're wanting to build as a product. It's vast and varied, and you were learning stuff all of the time, and as you said, trying to codify that into something that is then kind of, hey, look, we've got a bucket of the right shape and this feedback can come in, but actually something else comes in that's really interesting. Or the market dynamics have moved. Where I am at Helios, I've been talking about this a lot the last few days. The market dynamics in the health tech space and the pharma space is so fluid, particularly with what we do, which is all weight loss drugs. There was so many eyes from so many perspectives from regulation, from social media, from conspiracy theorists even, to kind of go, hey, what should we be doing today? What should we be doing tomorrow? In what direction? And there was a lot of free flowing movement between that, because actually the feedback is just coming from everywhere. And so how do you pull that in a way that can be codified, can be compared, can be quantified? It's just so difficult.
I totally agree. One of the things that I've actually, 10 years ago, I was talking to customers about it, and still get this question today, is like, how do we stay on top of every individual piece of feedback? And I think one of the things that's really holding people back is this mentality that our feedback, we treat it almost like an inbox, and we want to get to inbox 0. And what you both just said proves that that's impossible. Like, we have this vast library of feedback from all of these different sources on all of these different topics. And I think it's our job, tell me what you think, but I think it's our job as in product operations to almost be the librarian in that situation, where it's not our job and it's not the PM's job to read every single book in that library. It's giving them the access to the right topic at the right time, and making sure that they know what's available, they know how to use the system and the process to get that information. And that really frees you up to actually look at what are these different sources, what's happening in our Zendesk tickets, what's happening in our Gong calls, and pulling that all into one place so you can actually access it and search for it and research it for it at the right time, on the right place.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point. I'm a huge fan of research repositories for that exact same reason, right? For making research not only accessible to the people who have conducted it in the immediate, but also that is a great starting point, right? Historical research is a great starting point for your next great idea, right? Or if you have like a vague inkling, but you're not 100% sure of whether you should actually even just take the next step and maybe conduct a new round of discovery, new round of research, right? Accessing past research is so valuable there, like having a book in a library, right? Finding the right one for your particular use case. But I feel like that making that useful is one of the toughest challenges, right? And there are so many tools out there. I think about 2 years ago, nearly every single week, I had a message in my LinkedIn inbox of yet another startup promising to, summarize customer feedback through AI, right? And there's loads of companies out there that promise to do that better or less well. So that's not really the problem, right? Like, technologically speaking, I think by now we kind of have the tools to, hook up all the different channels we have into one stream, and to a certain extent kind of summarize them somewhat appropriately, right? But I think making that available to the organization broadly, and like you say, I think it really is that change in mindset from, oh God, I need to look at everything I need to read every single opinion every single person has on our product, to I have a hypothesis. I want to find out if I'm on the right track, whether this even is a perceived problem or not, so that I might be able to take the next step.
100%.
Of all times, this morning I had a chat with a chap I've not spoken to in about a year, who works on one of these products as such, and I completely agree. There's 10 to a penny of all of these sorts of things. Exactly like you, Antonia. I still do get a number of these in my inbox. Oh, would you give us some feedback? I don't know. I haven't got. To be honest with you, I haven't got the time. What was really interesting about this is, and I won't name drop. That's not fair. Is this was much like those other products. It's going to hook up your AI and do all the searching for you and things like that. But actually, what this was doing was then starting to categorize a lot of this, to actually to be able to create buckets and filters and tags and things like that automatically for you, to say, hey, you've had 200 of your Zendesk tickets, and they all feature, the word a problem, or they all feature the word medical, or they all feature the word of one of our drugs, or a competitor, or something like that. And I thought, actually, now that becomes quite powerful, because you're not just picking out the commonalities, you're telling me, you're quantifying for me how much of this. And so we've not just got the feedback that we need to be looking at, but now we're able to start quantifying this a lot more, to say how many times has this come up from our customers. And then from that, we can then start to identify the customers that this feedback comes from. And now I'm looking at this and I'm going, how much of this is already on our dashboards that we've spent forever trying to understand, trying to pull together, so that actually we can then start making some decisions about our product? And that is literally just gone, plug in, off it goes, away it goes. So there is absolutely so much of this and it is very clever technology out there. But there has been there's clearly been a gold rush on that as an area, on customer feedback and plugging AI into it. And actually now it's what's the really clever stuff that can come out of this that really makes a difference to my business, rather than just being another shrink wrapped one that's on the shelf.
Yeah, 100%. So we have had a recent example. You mentioned the Zendesk tickets. We've actually had a recent example where we were able to start analyzing our Zendesk tickets in our product, and we found a quick win. It was like a 2 or 3 point ticket, but we'd had hundreds of Zendesk tickets on this one topic. It was just a confusing piece of a user export. So on the report, when it was exported, people were confused about what was happening within it. And we were able to identify that and fix it in a couple of weeks. We needed to plan it in and get it fixed. And it was so powerful to be able to have that data to just show to the product team. And so now we're working on ways to actually get that information straight to the product team. So it's not product ops like finding the quick wins. We're giving that data to the product team directly. And it's been so powerful to have that. But I think that, like, going back to the original point, I just think that it's so important to focus on those aspects of how you're managing feedback, and not necessarily like the minutia, the detailed one by one. Another thing that I see a lot is this whole topic around like closing the loop on the feedback that you do get. I almost want to give listeners like a message of hope. Like, you don't have to write a custom message to every single person who asks you for a feature or gives you feedback on your products. There's a more scalable way to do that, and that's through transparency on what you are building. And if you're not going to build something, you can say no, that you're not going to build it through your tooling. You can get back to those customers. And I think it's really empowering just approaching this whole topic with a bit of realism and having realistic expectations about how long the workday is and what you can actually do. And like you said, using AI to really identify, like, what are those themes? What does this certain segment of customers want? And we could focus on that. And it's just really powerful when you think about it when you kind of flip it upside down and focus in on, it's almost like shining a flashlight on what you really want to see, instead of just turning the light on and being overwhelmed by the mental load that this topic can bring to teams. So
Yeah.
I agree. I agree with everything you said, and no, I agree with everything you said. I've got one challenge on one piece that you said there. Or it's a way that I've kind of worked with this, and that's about kind of getting back to everybody. There are lots of different situations with that. Yes, so clearly, if you're a massive organisation, and we're talking with customers, that's much more difficult, if not impossible to do. But many of them, I mean, most businesses that I've worked with, a lot of our feedback comes from internally, or is by proxy coming internally through our sales teams and customer service teams and whatnot. And I'm quite passionate about kind of when these feature requests come in and things like that, that actually we are doing something with those in terms of a communication and a response. Firstly, absolutely, we can't do everything. I am absolutely passionate that we should be turning around and saying no, to these things. But what I am passionate about is actually we do say kind of, hey, we've looked at this and we're not going to do it. And here's obviously the reason why. I almost don't care what the reason why is. I am passionate that we do that. And for the reason that with our internal staff, again, size of the business is key here, that we're telling them that we've looked at this, that they know that we've looked at this, that we have reviewed it, that actually we're not pushing this one forward because it doesn't meet with ultimately the business goals, or at least the business goals now. You submitted this 12 months ago. Okay, we didn't get round to it then, but now it's just not relevant anymore to us. The reason for it is I've been in so many businesses whereby those feature requests have just fallen into the black hole, and that's the thing. And it really does lose that relationship and that trust with those teams. They think, well, what's the point in even feeding back at all? Because I have no idea whether it gets looked at, doesn't get looked at. Nothing we ever do ever appears on the roadmap. Whether it does or not is a different matter. And I'm always very, very passionate about that kind of communication element.
what we do is we focus on our ideas. So that's like a higher level in the hierarchy. And those are created by product managers. They're really high quality. And then we use AI to connect the data to those ideas that product managers are curating and maintaining. And then, so our communication is happening. It's happening at the idea level. So it's much more scaled in its approach. We also have the portal, and that's the same thing. So everybody has been to a customer portal where you can see everybody's feedback and everybody's upvoting everybody. And it's really frustrating because you see the things with the highest votes and they never get built, it seems like. It's like, what is this machine doing? And so what we've done is again, we're sharing at the idea level. So it's one level up. It's what the PMs want to communicate that we are building, but we also include things that we're doing discovery on. So it's not just like, this is what's on the roadmap. You don't have any input. It's, here's what we're thinking about. Please tell us if this is a must-have or a nice-to-have, or you don't want this at all, and tell us more about that. And then we also have the ability to say what is on our roadmap, and we collect feedback on those items as well. So it's, yes, I totally agree. It's a very important piece, but I hate when I see people getting so bogged down in how do we maintain all of this? And I think there is a scalable way to do it. And it doesn't have to be with Pendo, obviously, but that's just what we use internally, so that's my use case.
Other platforms are available.
Hey, I would love to hear your opinion, Aly, on this. And I've had a few conversations about this in this past week, and it might be a little bit controversial, but I'd love to hear your opinion. I think right now we're kind of at an inflection point of more and more AI tools being available, more and more AI tools being integrated into our day-to-day. And I love AI for helping me do what I do well faster, or maybe even better, right? But so there's two things in particular I see come up with customer feedback. I think on the one hand, there is this almost notion of having to legitimize it by making it quantitative as opposed to purely qualitative. And the second one is maybe just a slight personal worry around the difference between consuming a machine-made aggregate and consuming direct customer feedback that potentially helps me increase my empathy, maybe.
Well, on the second one, I think it's really important to continue having conversations with customers. Like PMs should be talking to customers, not all day, every day, but often, to really build that empathy. I think, again, I also recommend to our PMs that instead of reading through every single piece of feedback that comes in, and blocking out 2 hours every week or whatever it might be, I say block off 30 minutes every 2 weeks, every week, every 2 weeks, and time box yourself. Limit it to that 30 minutes to really actually digest those feedback items one by one. But don't take on this massive burden of doing that. As soon as somebody goes on holiday, that becomes a task that they never return to. And they don't want to go back there because it's just too painful. So I think like this has to go hand in hand with talking to customers and reading customer feedback. It's just making sure you're focused and not taking on the whole mountain. If obviously this is all generalized feedback, right? Like ideas, right? So if you're on a smaller scale, if you've only got a few customers, you can easily do this. But once you get to the point where it's becoming overwhelming, it's time to take a step back and develop a different plan and a different system. Can you tell me more about the first one that you mentioned?
The first one. So I feel like I don't know, and maybe this is just the circles I've been operating in, right? But I feel like to a certain extent, hearing one customer's voice is never really seen as quote unquote useful.
Yeah.
Until it reaches critical mass.
Yeah.
And I think broadly speaking, I understand why. Like we cannot listen to every single individual and treat that as equal to all of the other, challenges and opportunities that might be on our plate. But I feel like there's just been an increasing push in making qualitative data sort of sexy by quantifying it, by saying, oh, well, but 200 people have said this, so we should now pay attention to it, as opposed to, well, maybe 10 people have said it a quarter ago, but we didn't deem that important enough at that point because it's kind of quantity over quality, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think all feedback is important. It has to be balanced with other things, right? It's not the only input to making the decision. So the first thing you have to look at is what is your product strategy? And if one person said something was important and it's right in alignment with product strategy, we are going to go to that customer. We're going to talk to them more about their need. And potentially, like with what we would do is we would put that in our portal and start gathering other potential customers to talk to who are interested in that or maybe who aren't. I definitely see what you mean. I'm going to have to think more about that one, but I think it's important to keep it like the holistic view of how you're making decisions and not look at just the numbers of feedback items.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting segue, actually, to something I've just written down as we were talking is, perhaps many people watching this are thinking like, feedback, ideas, these are feature requests. These are things that have come in fairly formally in that respect. And it is very, very different, if you're in B2B versus B2C in terms of what those channels are. So how does your reviews, your NPS or customer NPS, your Trustpilot reviews, all of those bits and pieces, how do they fit into this mix as well, up against your much more formal, much more directed, much more, let's call it positive feedback? How does that fit in?
So again, this is not an advertisement, but we do have the ability to pull in our reviews into our feedback tool. It's called Listen. And So we pull in our NPS data in there, and then we can analyze it from that perspective. Other things do happen with those types of feedback. For example, for our NPS data, we have a Slack channel, and all of our NPS responses go into that Slack channel. We have a lot of visibility over that. So anything really positive or anything really negative, we're going to have a conversation about what that looks like, and tag in the right team so they get the credit and the shout outs as well when people are raving about what they're doing. So yeah.
It's just interesting because something that going back a few years now, kind of when I was much more in the ed tech market, we built some apps that were going out to kind of over 1 million kind of parents across the country, and we were quite hot on the reviews, like the App Store reviews and things like that. And now what was really interesting there, it was not the most perfect app. It didn't score particularly highly, if I'm perfectly honest with you, in the stores. But what was very interesting is the type of person and the type of mentality of the people that were leaving those reviews in that instance. They were always quite negative, but it was much more like, I'm going to take the effort to complain rather than I'm going to make an effort to say, actually, I love this app. Maybe nobody loved the app, and that's also fine. But I think there is a certain, thing with reviews in that how much we are prepared to kind of effort that we'll put into to be very positive about a product or a service that we've had versus actually we're going to make the effort to complain because we might want to get something back, we might want to get a discount, we might want to get a refund, we might want to expose whatever. The reason why I'm saying that is actually how much does that then start to skew figures when we are then looking at AI in this respect? Because hopefully AI will detect these things and make accommodations for that. But certainly in terms of when we're sort of quantifying this, that has a real potential to skew figures when actually it's being done. The reasons for doing this are not necessarily accurate. They're not necessarily unbiased, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. I think it comes back to that segmentation. So looking at the feedback that's relevant to what you're working on. So if you're doing discovery on something, and those types of feedback items are relevant, then you're going to want to look at that. But it's going to be in the context of a job that you're doing. So I don't think it's necessarily skewing the numbers if you're analyzing it in the right way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, interesting.
But I do love this notion, right? It's like, 10 out of 10 people who responded to the survey said surveys are awesome, right? Like you are selecting, like depending on which channel you're looking at, depending on where the people are communicating with you and under what circumstances, you will have to kind of view the feedback through that lens. And I think that's a really interesting point when we then go back to this aggregation, when you have tools where you plug in many different channels, and all of a sudden you see 20% of folks are really, really upset, really, really angry. But then you dig a little deeper, and honestly, I don't think anybody who's ever just felt lukewarm about the product has sent in a review. And it's the same with restaurant reviews on Google. It's either 1 star or 5 star, right? Like that's it. The 2, 3, 4 stars you don't typically hear about because it is to a certain extent a very emotional thing, leaving feedback, right? Unless you as a PM or as a product organization specifically go out there to solicit it, right? The stuff you typically proactively receive is very emotive.
If you think about it like a funnel, so all of the people using your product are not giving you feedback, and maybe it's the 20%, and 10% are really angry, 10% are really happy. But what about the other 80%? What do they want? So there's some clever ways that you can actually do that in the product. Like we do closed door tests where when we were building out the roadmaps functionality in Listen, we had a now, next, later roadmap built. And so when somebody goes to create a new roadmap, they see the template pop up, and then it had a second option that we hadn't built yet. And it said, it popped up with a feedback form if somebody clicked on that, and then it gave them additional options. So there's all sorts of things you can do to kind of see okay, what does that 80% think? And especially the percent of that 80% that are using roadmaps already. Like that's your audience right there. That's who you want to capture the feedback from. And then reaching out to them and having those conversations. Like you've got to find a way to get them to volunteer, and then you can get in there and actually have those really interesting conversations and find out more about what they need and what they want to do.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting, right? Like, because I think to a certain extent we run the danger of most people when they talk about closing the feedback loop, when they talk about, integrating customer feedback into their product management processes, 9 times out of 10 they're talking about inbound, right? They're exclusively talking about all of the stuff we receive proactively from the outside world. And it's not very common for folks to think about that as a dimension in combination with proactive customer research, essentially, right? Proactive discovery. And I really think you need to have both in order to have a balanced view of what people actually think about your product.
Yeah, sure, I agree.
So before we move on, there's a last piece here that I'm really interested in, which we've touched upon, and that's how does this influence our prioritization? How does this influence everything that we've talked about? So we've got AI giving us all of this lovely quantitative and qualitative information. Fantastic. How does that marry up, in both of your opinions, with some businesses being, we are so data driven. We what we want is we want to get rid of all this decision making. We want AI to basically build our roadmap and tell us what to do and things like that. How does that now start to marry up with what we've just talked about and all this feedback?
Antonia, I know you have thoughts on this.
I always have thoughts. No, honestly, I would actually love to see just a company try and completely outsource their decision making to AI and then just see what happens. Like, simply as a case study, I think that would be incredibly interesting. But honestly, I think it goes back to what Aly said beforehand, right? It's about your strategy, because ultimately you won't win by only following your own heart, but you also won't win by only following customer requests, right? You need to have that healthy kind of tension. And it's really then, it becomes a prioritization exercise, right? How much benefit do we perceive from solving this problem for our customers? How much benefit do we perceive from going in this bold new direction, right? Ultimately, you need both. But it is really about your strategy. And I think sometimes what we forget is you can also ignore certain bits of customer feedback, right? And that's fine, because maybe people are requesting a feature that your product just does not do, right? People are trying to misuse your product for a different purposes than what you are actually intending it to use. And then sure, you can go down the route of, these are not our core customers. Maybe you can do some more education around what your product is actually there to do. But it's also totally fine to proactively say, okay, this is a big frustration, but we won't solve this because either we have bigger fish to fry, or because this would take us away, right, from our core strategy, from our core direction.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think this just made me think of an example of back in the receptive days, again, like 10 years ago. I was on the front lines talking to customers day in and day out, and there were a few things, I don't remember what they were, but I remember there were a few things at the top of like we called it our smart list. And it was based on customer priorities. I was telling customers day in and day out that we weren't working on those things. And the reason why, it was because we didn't have a Salesforce integration and we needed to go after enterprise accounts. And it was so clear that was the important choice to make. That was the right choice to make, even though the data said otherwise, because it's not always telling the complete picture. And there's the strategy, like you said, is the important piece there. And it's gonna drive those decisions, but you have to have the data alongside it. But yeah, maybe I'm gonna test out your idea to use AI to make all product decision things on an example company. That sounds like an interesting blog post.
Yeah, and if anybody's watching and wants to, participate in a nice little experiment, get in touch. There's absolutely fantastic conversations on all of that. I'd like to switch this up just a little bit now, and Aly, and would really love to hear, a bit more about kind of what's going on within inside Pendo at the moment, and particularly from a product ops perspective. So what does product ops look like, within Pendo? I think Pendo has always been at the forefront of product operations. I think certainly long before I got involved in the sector. And so it'd be really interesting to hear what it looks like for you right now.
Yeah, I would love to talk about that. So at the minute, we have our product operations team is kind of the umbrella for both product operations and program management. So we have 4 people in the products team, and we are at the global level. So we work across all of the product areas. We're looking at our process, our tooling, our data. We're looking at all of the key product ops components across all of those product areas. And then we have the program managers that are embedded within the teams themselves. So they're really focused on the go-to-market piece and supporting their Scrum teams alongside the go-to-market teams to actually deliver products to the market. So that's actually worked really well. It's been really cool to see the transformation. When I joined Pendo, I was a Scrum Master back in 2020 for a couple of years, and it's been really, really cool to see the transformation. So, problems that we were talking about 6 months ago, even 3 months ago, sometimes like they just don't exist anymore. And back in 2020, that wasn't necessarily the case. Like we tried to solve the same communication problems and reporting problems a few times, like every quarter be like, right, let's try this a different way. And so I think we've really cracked it internally, how our teams are working together. We obviously have problems to solve like anybody else. Right now, one of the big projects that I'm working on is a company OKR around getting AI embedded into all of our teams. So I'm focused on the product team specifically. And it's been really cool to see how all of the different team members are using AI in their day-to-day. But me personally, like I've been struggling. It's not that easy to in the workday to not only get your job done, but also try the AI tools and see how to get the most out of them and how to get there in the end. It's not uncommon that I'll spend an hour on something and I'm like, okay, I'm just going to go back to the old way of doing it. So it's been really interesting, that learning curve, learning with everybody else. And there's a couple of ways that we share those learnings at the minute, and then we've got plans for the future. So I can talk a little bit about what we're doing at the minute, if that's useful.
Yeah, go for it.
So right now we have calls every 2 weeks with the whole product team. It's optional. And we have an amazing designer who's been leading the way on those calls. The first 30 minutes is learning. So somebody brings a lesson or a presentation on something AI related. And then the second 30 minutes of that meeting is always hands-on, trying the tools, learning from each other. And we'll all go in with the same prompt and see what everybody gets at the end of it. It's been really fascinating, a really good way to learn. And then we also have a Slack channel just for the product team all around AI. So we're prompted every week, hey, what tools have you been using? What did you learn? What would you do differently next time? That's always my favorite. But yeah, it's been really interesting to see what it actually looks like in the real world. Because I feel like you go on LinkedIn and everybody's like solved it, and then in your day-to-day you still have to figure it out yourself. So it's been really fun. So my next steps with that are just to connect with all of the leaders in the product team, find out what's working, and we're starting to operationalize those pieces. So like for prototyping, we need to select a tool soon and start rolling that out across all of the designers. So it's really exciting. I love this job. There's never a dull moment.
That's amazing. I was actually lucky enough to be invited to a dinner here in Berlin by Pendo, and I remember speaking to your field CPO. And he is just so embedded in all of the AI tools. And I swear to God, like, I think in a 30-minute conversation, I learned more about AI than I did in all of the years prior.
Yeah.
And it actually, you know what, like I actually took notes, and I actually started integrating some of those tools into how I get work done. And it's been so interesting to see that evolve. But I totally feel that learning curve.
Yeah.
I think you need to learn, right, how to prompt. You need to learn what works with what tool, which model is good at doing what, etc., before you can kind of hit the ground running and make AI be a meaningful, like, contributing factor to your efficiency. But I think once you've got it, and we recently on the podcast actually spoke to Claire Hawthorne, and she had a very similar mission of how do we as a company integrate AI into, our product work. And I think it's really exciting, and I can't wait to sort of catch up with you in 6 months and see where you've landed.
Yeah, I'm today, just this morning, I was working on a framework to kind of bring all the tools together. So I'll definitely be sharing something out in the next few months when we get everybody in on that.
It's certainly on my list to do this year. I freely admit I'm behind the times on AI. I've not through a lack of trying, but I'm a very manual person. I've just not dedicated myself to looking in any great detail. Not so much using it, but actually then finding the use cases for it. I think a lot of the things that I do myself for my job, I'm quite comfortable with the automations. I'm big on automation, not big on AI so far. And I think I focus a lot of my time on kind of the step-by-step processes and how do we automate those. But it is absolutely because I know for my teams at Helios, it's certainly an area that we want to get on board with in 2025. Some of our teams have started to use this. So we're using the out of the box tools. We're using Gemini for our transcriptions. We're using a new tool for our research, our UX research, and basically doing all the stuff that we talked about earlier about kind of collating all of that feedback and making sense out of it. But for me, this year is going to be about actually looking at actually what are those problems to solve. And I was having a very interesting conversation with a friend of mine called Ross Webb, who does another podcast, the Top Pods podcast. And we've been talking a lot about actually this from a product ops perspective, rather than just throwing AI at kind of individual problems. Actually about looking at your journey as being product ops and actually as a product manager and trying to understand and map out what does good look like before you start throwing AI at any of this. Because you can do it on the individual things, but actually, can you get AI to kind of go, actually, can you do step A and step B and step C for me? Which I only know if I've kind of almost got a bit more of a gold standard of what step A and B and C starts to look like, which of course is Product Ops 101. How do we know what we want these steps and ways of working to be?
I love that perspective because it does feel disjointed trying to make sense of all of the tools that are out there and how it actually impacts your day to day. And then you see tools that are like, we can do everything. And that feels overwhelming as well. So it is really tricky.
Yeah, I do love that this is now becoming a product ops topic. And because we're so uniquely, like perfectly positioned in the organization to integrate this in people's day to day. And I think this is such a wonderful example of the difference between having dedicated product ops resources or a dedicated focus on product ops versus not having it, right? So like folks without that dedicated focus might do things here and there ad hoc as and when it arises, but most often than not is disjointed, right? Because nobody has that holistic overview over what's actually going on or over how work actually gets produced and released. So actually having this sort of how can we integrate AI into our organizations to make them more effective, be a product ops topic, is so validating for me. I love it.
Yeah. Graham, one thing you might want to check out is I've been doing this 30 days of GPT, I think it's called. So I'll share the link with you in the actual source. So when you share this out, but it starts on day one, just ask ChatGPT this thing. And I've learned so much about to be honest, I've only done 4 or 5 days of it. And I've learned so much in those 4 or 5 days, because after you ask it the first prompt, then it asks you to revise it. And then it asks you to tell it to be more specific. And then it says, it's really fascinating, because if you just walk up and ask it a question, you just are not getting the full power out of the tools. So something I use it a lot for is just, what am I not thinking about? Like, give me a project plan based on XYZ. And it fills in those blanks and thinks about things from a different perspective. So, yeah.
Oh, very interesting. I will take a look at that, and I'm sure many people watching will value that as a little project to look at as well. So thank you. I just want to come back to what Antonia said. Absolutely, this is. I don't know if you've noticed, either of you have noticed, but just recently. So we're filming this on the 1st of April, and just recently there has been a lot of conversation around. Oh, hang on a second. Do you need a full-time product ops person or team, or actually do you just need the function to be solved? And I know my argument has always been, well, yes, as long as what you do need is the dedicated time and resource to focus on product ops. That doesn't need to be a full-time dedicated person role, but it does need somebody doing it, and not just when they've got the time. And we seem to have had this conversation a lot just recently. It seems to constantly be coming up. I don't know if it's because businesses are like, do I really need to get a full-time person in, or can I get rid of one and just have a half one or whatnot? But it just seems to be coming up a lot. And I think absolutely this whole topic has been excellent in saying, look, if you dabble at this, you just throw AI at this for one product manager and they solve it for a problem. Well, firstly, how does all the others do that and do it in the same way and do it well? But actually, then you're only solving it a bit here and a bit here and a bit here. Actually, how are you taking that holistic approach with AI and saying, actually, AI can solve phrase A and B and C and can get me set up for D, and I haven't had to do any of that, but you would have never seen or worked on that without some dedicated time and that holistic approach.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I think, like, I have this conversation all of the time, right? Oh, at how many product managers do I need to start hiring a full-time product ops person? Does every company need product ops, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Like, I've had this conversation for 4 years now, I think. And my answer is always the same, right? Like, you need focus, right? How you get that focus is up to you. How your organization is structured, whether it's disciplined or not, whether you have the resources, right, to get somebody on board or not. Those are the factors that your environment dictates to a certain extent, but you need focus. And it's not something you do or do not. You either do it well or you do it badly.
Yeah. Aly, any thoughts on that before we wrap up?
No, I totally agree. I think that it's been invaluable to have our teams structured the way that they are. Like I was saying, with the program managers embedded in the teams, they are focusing on go-to-market and their team's success. And that frees us up to have that focus on, okay, how do we connect the dots between this is working really well over here, but we haven't rolled it out over here. We have that global perspective so we can actually roll things out and make sure people are enabled and bring people along with us, and all of the change management that goes with even a little change, and just making sure that we're listening, we're having those conversations cross-functionally. It just wouldn't happen if we weren't here. It wouldn't happen if I was a program manager. I don't have that. I wouldn't have that view. And you have to prioritize something. And if you're a program manager trying to do these projects that are across the board, it's just not going to happen, because you've got your team that you're responsible for, and your leadership team as well. Like, it's not just one thing. You're getting pulled in all sorts of different directions. So I think this is the way to do it. If anybody has any questions on how we did that, yeah, just reach out.
Yeah. Absolutely fantastic place, for us to finish today. I've genuinely loved this, because we've actually covered quite a breadth of conversations, but running through all of this is that theme of AI for sure. For me, I think two kind of real outcomes there is, AI is here, and there was a lot of benefits to that. but possibly with just a cautionary note to say, actually, you need to think a little bit more about before you just throw AI at the problem. What do you want to achieve? Like everything, what's your outcomes? What do you want to achieve with this? And potentially with just a little bit of a thought about actually what you're going to do with all of that information and how can you interpret what the AI gives you back. So absolutely, from me, my perspective, fantastic. Antonia, any final words from yourself?
No, I think it's a really exciting time in product operations in general, in product management in general. Like, we're seeing a lot of changes. I think a lot of positive changes, even if they may have come out of some really dark places in recent years, right? But people tend to ask me a couple of times a year how I feel the future of product ops looks like, and I think I'm more optimistic than I've ever been, probably. So it's wonderful, and it's been wonderful having you here, Aly, as well.
Thank you so much. I've learned so much as well. I was excited to talk about feedback so that I could pick your brains. So I'm gonna take my notes back and do some research. I'm excited. Thank you both.
Fantastic. Well, that's it, everybody watching. Thank you, as always, to my co-host, Antonia, and for our special guest today, Aly. Please do connect with any of us on LinkedIn, as always. I have to say thank you to our continuing friends at the Product-Led Alliance for always facilitating and then going doing the editing, publishing, blah, 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 of all of this. Thank you for watching today, and we look forward to welcoming you on the next episode of the Product Ops Chronicles. Thank you, everybody.